Good morning to you. It's a cold Thursday morning here in the Magic City, and I bundled up a little bit. It's going to get nice, I think, today. But the older I get, the colder I get. So I guess that's just part of it. But anyway, looking forward to everything the day has here. I got some new employees, kind of been working on with them and kind of dealing with some of that. And got basketball tonight again, so should be fun. And everything's good. And then we're into the weekend, and so I got a bunch of stuff I'm going to be doing and getting ready for just selling some books and other things. So looking forward to all that. Should be a great weekend, and hope everything's going well in your world as well. Hope you're plodding along in your goals and in your setting of those things. Those are important that we deal with setting goals. I talked to a lot of people. Yesterday I had a conversation with my team, and I was just like, hey, so have you set any goals? And they're like, yeah, I kind of have them up here. I'm like, man, that doesn't do a lot of good up there because that gets crowded. Somewhere you have to write it down, put it on a calendar where it's visible and you can see it. And anyway, it was a good conversation, but I'm just encouraging you, man, set some goals, right? Set them in those 7 areas. Set them in the area of faith. What kind of goals, how do you want to grow this year in your faith? And how about your family? How about your friendships? What do you want to do in the area of your field, that passion, that place that you pour your energy into, either to make a living or just to make a life? And then let's deal with some finances. What kind of financial goals do you have? What kind of fitness goals do you have? And what kind of fun you got planned for this year? Those are the 7 areas, and you got to keep working those. Now, enough of that. Let's jump into the truth. We are in the Gospel of John, chapter 9, and we just looked at a story of healing yesterday. Now we're going to see the response. And man, it's overwhelming when you just kind of just keep reading through this passage and looking at it and listening to it. I love to listen to the scriptures. I have an app called the Dwell app, and it's a little pay deal, but man, it's good. Just put that thing in when I'm walking or whatever, and let the scripture just kind of do its thing. And so what you realize is unbelief and the terrible outlook of life that it has. It's stubbornness, it's obstinance, it's just it is what it is, and I want us to see that here in this area. You and me will come up against opposition anytime you're sharing truth. Put a verse up, do whatever. If you're in the right crowd, someone gets hostile to it. I find on some of the social media platforms that I'm on, great hostility. And accusations, everything turns personal. They'll see my profile, they'll call me an old man, old white guy, or whatever, and or then they'll they don't like an argument that you present, and then you respond with more intelligent argument. It really creates an incredible hostility. It's amazing, but that is such as unbelief. And so let's just look at it, see it unfold. I think we'll find some application here for us as it relates to just expecting that there will be great opposition anytime you seek to proclaim God as Most High. So let's read the story, kind of verse 1 through 12, just to get our bearings, and then we'll jump into some truth and see what we can discover. So it says, as Jesus passed, this is right after the Feast of the Tabernacles and all of that, probably the end of of that week. It says, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? Jesus answered, it was neither that this man sinned, nor his parents, but it was that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must carry out the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. Now, that's kind of a nuance of the Sabbath. It's on the Sabbath, and he's just talking about, hey, we're working on the Sabbath. My father doesn't sleep. I'm working. And so it's a little dig, but at the same time, it's full of truth. And he says this, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. He realizes, look, man, the opposition is coming. They're trying to kill me at every turn now. They're trying to arrest me. They want to kill me. And I know that. This is what I came for. But they don't get to take my life. I lay it down willingly. He says, but right now, hey, man, I'm the light of the world. When he had said this, he spit on the ground and made mud from the saliva and applied the mud to his eyes. And said to him, go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he left and washed and came back seeing. So the neighbors, now this is what we didn't really get to yesterday, and we just read it, but it gets us to another place. He says, so the neighbors and those who previously saw him as begging were saying, Isn't this the guy that used to sit and beg? Others were saying, this is he. Still others were saying, nah, I think it must look like him. So I see this guy and they go, man, isn't that the guy that we see walking? I mean, as we walk, we see him begging there at the temple. And they're like, no, he must just look like him because the guy's walking around seeing. The man kept saying, but the man's going like, no, look, I hear you talking. I'm the one, right? Hey, you can ask me. I'll tell you I am that guy. I'm the one. So they were saying to him, how then were your eyes opened? He answered, the man who is called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So I went away and washed and received my sight. And they said to him, where is he? And he said, I don't know. He healed me and he took off. I'm pretty excited about what's going on. Verse 13, this is where we pick up the story today. And this is where dissension, and it's a crazy deal. Let's just read it. It's a narrative. It's easy to see. They brought the man who was previously blind to the Pharisees. So you're thinking, why are they doing that? Why didn't they just let the man go on his merry way? I mean, he's healed. Let him enjoy his healing. Let him enjoy life. For the first time, he's seeing things. Let him adjust to that stuff, right? And so they bring it to the man who was previously blind, to the Pharisees. I think they did that because they're intimidated by the Pharisees, and we're going to see that in a minute. And so I think they're just trying to curry favor. I'm not real sure why they did that, but that's what happened. So they brought the man who was previously blind to the Pharisees. Now it was a Sabbath on the day that Jesus made the mud. So this is not the Sabbath. This is a different day. Now listen to what they said. Made the mud and opened his eyes. Now, the more we dig into mud and saliva and all of that, it must be in some sense a form of a medicinal thing. And so in the Jewish, not the Torah, not the scriptures themselves, but the rabbinic law, the rabbis kept adding to the law and made it so cumbersome. But one of those things was that you could not really heal on the Sabbath. You couldn't perform medicine. You couldn't give medicine on the Sabbath, which is very strange to me. But anyway, you keep digging. You find Menomedes was a historian of the Jews, and this is some of the things I read that he says. So here we go. So then the Pharisees also were asking him how again he received his sight. So now he's already explained it to the neighbors. They've drug him to the Pharisees. And so now it says this. Now it was on the verse 15. Now the Pharisees were asking him again how he received his sight. And he said to them, he applied mud to my eyes, I washed, and I see. Therefore, some of the Pharisees were saying, this man isn't from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. Right? So this is their logic. The man broke the Sabbath, so he can't be God. Now, he didn't break God's Sabbath. In fact, Jesus has already educated them on the fact that the Sabbath wasn't made for man, but man was made for the Sabbath. And so that means that they own it, right? And so he says this. They say there were some of the Pharisees saying this man isn't from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. Now that is how that's a logical deduction. A plus B equals C kind of thing. And so they're like, okay, he broke the Sabbath. God never breaks the law, therefore he can't be God. What they failed to understand was he didn't break the Sabbath according to Moses. He broke the Sabbath according to the Pharisees. Big difference. Now, then it says this. Therefore, some of the Pharisees were saying, this man is not from God. But others were saying, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And so there was dissension among them. So there's two tracks, right? One, he broke the Sabbath, he can't be God. The other is, people who heal can't be sinners, therefore he must be from God, right? So that's their logic. And this is the rift that's going on among those who disbelieve. So they said again to the man who was blind. Now this is what's interesting, because now they're going to examine him, and so they say, so what do you say about him since your eyes are since he opened your eyes? And he said, well, he's a prophet. Now what's interesting is that they're asking him this question. They're not interested in his answer so much. They don't believe that he has a wealth of information that can be trusted, because he's not really. See, when you have blindness, it was somewhat of considered a curse and a plague, that it was God brought that on you, so you weren't allowed into the temple. And so this man is not a learned man from the rabbis. This man apparently just a good student of the scriptures, but he says this. No doubt he's a prophet. The Jews then did not believe it about him. So here's the thing. It always comes with a bias, right? They just heard this man. They ask him the question. He gives it. They've seen that the man can see and that everybody testified that he couldn't see. But unbelief always brings a bias. It never wants to believe facts. It's always trying to disbelieve things. There's no openness here. And so it says the Jews who then did not believe it about him. Then that he had been blind and had received sight until they called the parents. They, we don't even think you were blind. You see how this goes? This is crazy. So they call the parents of the one who had received the sight. So what are they doing now? Unbelief always looks for an alternative. Unbelief always wants to it starts with the premise and then tries to prove it, as opposed to just looking at facts and deducing something from it. Big difference. And you'll notice this as you deal with people in the world. This is how they respond to things. And so we get to verse 19. And they questioned them. So they bring the parents. This has gotten to be a big deal, man. A guy was healed. This has gotten lost in the whole thing. He was blind and now he sees. And now it's just this big political football, right? Now this is just this religious football thing going back and forth. Well, Jesus didn't do this, or Jesus couldn't have done that. We know who Jesus is. Jesus, this isn't him. This man was healed. We don't even believe he's healed anymore, right? This is their illogic, and this is what happens. But they're always looking for what I call alternative truth, right? That's why you'll hear, like, on the LGBT and homosexuality, there's what's called 1946 Project. That's their attempt at trying to say, well, just some man added the word homosexual in the scriptures. It didn't belong until 1946. And it goes into this stupid deal without really searching out to see what the original text says. They just want to stick with an English. That's a side note, but it just comes to me as I see this. It's what happens. We're always looking for alternative truth. Oh, but that's not how I see it, right? And so, but truth is truth, and it stands on its own. Now, so then here's what happens. And they, this is your son, verse 19. And they questioned him, saying, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? Then how does he see?" Now his parents, they just got there. They may not have even known that he was healed yet. So it says this: his parents then answered and said, "We know that this is our son, and we know that he was born blind. But how he now sees, we don't know. Or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's of age. He'll speak for himself." They're like, "Why are you bringing us into look, he's a grown man. Let him answer it." Now, they did this because unbelief also is very punitive, right? If you don't agree with these individuals who disbelieve, they will attack you straight on, and they will punish you. And this is what's going on here. So look at what happens in verse 22 and 23. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already reached the decision that if anyone confessed him to be Christ, he was to be excommunicated from the synagogue. Listen, unbelief ostracizes those who dissent. You can't be friends with them. I have friends who are unbelievers, right? I'll let them be my friend. But there are some I can never be their friend because they have an opinion. And anytime I respond to anything, I'm the idiot in the room, right? This is what happens. It's because they can't tolerate this stuff. So here the Jews have set up a rule. Okay, here's a new rule. Anyone believes that Jesus is the Christ, you're out of the church, right? So the parents are like, let's just give straight facts. Yes, that's my son. Yes, he's healed. I don't know how that happened. Ask him, right? Now, why are they doing that? Because if they say, well, I mean, Jesus must have healed him, they're going to get kicked out of the synagogue. That is a big deal in that kind of culture. In the Romanian culture, the Romanian Orthodox, which is a lot like a Pharisaical deal. It's just very rigid in their belief, more in works than it is in faith. Very similar to the Pharisees. I remember sitting at tables and places with unbelievers there and sharing the gospel with them, of which they're very open. And I remember one lady was sitting there with me. She said, "I believe everything that you're telling me, but I can't publicly display faith in Christ like you're saying, or I won't be able to my kids won't be able to get married, and I won't have a place to be buried when I die. And that's how it works. That's how the Romanian Orthodox Church keeps its attenders and keeps its members. It's just by sheer force, not by faith, not by love, not by attraction, but just simply force. And this is the way the Pharisees are. Now, so there's the sin, they're ostracized. Now, unbelief is going to intimidate, right? Look at what verse 24 says. So for a second time, they summoned the man who had been blind. Now, all right, so now they talk to the parents. Now they're going back to him. So for a second time, they bring him in. And they said to him, hey, you give glory to God. We know that this man's a sinner. Don't you talk about him anymore. You just say God healed you. And then so that's that intimidation, right? I love the blind man's response. Look at what he says. He then answered, whether he's a sinner, I don't know. One thing I do know, look, he didn't even see him until he got healed. He didn't even know who he was talking to. He says, whether he's a sinner, I don't know. One thing I do know, though, I was blind, now I see. Right? I was blind, now I see. So they said to him, what did he do? What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? That's the big deal for them, because if he used some sort of medicine thing, they had him on violating their little rules. And he answered them, I told you already, and you did not listen. This guy's gotten pretty brave here. You're saying this to the Pharisees, right? Hey, I already told you, you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You do not want to become his disciples too, do you? So either that's a very ignorant man who thinks maybe you're asking these questions because you really want the truth, or maybe he's sarcastic, going, you don't like what I'm telling you. You don't really like the truth, do you? You think you want to be one of the disciples? I think it's probably the earlier. I think he's a little naive. But he says this, you don't want to be one of the disciples too, do you? Then they speak abusively to him. So see, unbelief will always create division, and this is what's happening here. They spoke abusively to him and said, you're his disciple. Now, he never said he was his disciple. He just said, you want to be one of his disciples. He said, you're his disciple. We're of the disciple of Moses. So they create division. We're Camp Moses. You're Team Jesus. You stink, right? And so that's what happens. There's no getting along. In the Christian faith, there is none of that. No one cares if you're Team Hindu or Team Muslim or Team Buddhist. They do care if you're Team Jesus. And so this is what, it's easy to understand that in any conversation you have with an atheist or an agnostic or someone who's been hurt by the church and just walked away from it. You have to be on their team or they want nothing to do with you. And this is what's going on here. We know that God has spoken to Moses. We know that, right? But as for this man, we don't know where he's from. But they do. Jesus told him, I'm from God, right? They know where he's from. They know. They want to think that, well, no, he came from Nazareth. And they failed to search the scriptures to see that, and to really dig into him and realize that he came from Bethlehem, which the scripture says so. But anyway, enough of that. He says, we know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we don't know where he's from. Now, listen to the boldness of the blind man. It doesn't take long, man. When you get faith, boldness comes with it. The man answered and said to them, well, here's the amazing thing, right? Listen to this. Here's the amazing thing, that you don't know where he's from, and yet he opened my eyes. Like, only God does that. What's going on in your brains, Mr. Pharisees? You don't know where he came from, but I can see. Only God can do that. That's the inference of what he's saying here. And so he says, we know that God does not listen to sinners. We know that if this guy was a sinner, God's not paying attention to him. But if someone is God-fearing and does his will, he listens to them. Listen, now all of a sudden he's schooling them on theology. It's crazy. Since the beginning of time, it has never been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. I'm the first person in the history of all of time, according to our very own record of the sacred text through the scriptures. No one has been born blind and received sight. I'm the first. They answered him, you were born entirely in sins and you're teaching us? So what they do? You're out of here, right? That's how they always respond. Unbelief shuts down opposition, and it always turns personal. You're just a sinner, right? And it's always full of abuse. So what happens? Powerful stuff. We're going to hear Jesus and his response tomorrow. And man, it's going to be a great day. Can't wait to see you then. Lord bless you. I'll talk to you soon.